Potential. How do you realize if people in your organization or on your team have the potential for a high level of leadership? And how do you develop your own potential? That's what we're going to get into today with Kimberly Gerber on Masters of Employee Development.
Welcome to Masters of Employee Development, Mike Acker's YouTube segment devoted to training team members in any type of organization. Your host is a best-selling author, corporate trainer, and business leader. Find out more about Mike at mikeacker.com. Each episode, Mike welcomes a CEO, HR director, or other experienced manager responsible for leadership and development. Together, Mike and his guest expert discuss training successes, challenges, and best practices. Lean in, listen, and take part in a community dedicated to improving life through increasing leadership. Now, here's your host, Mike Acker.
Kimberly, thank you so much for being on the program with me today.
Mike, I am pleased to be here.
One of the things I love doing is talking about employee development. And that's why we have this whole podcast and this whole segment on YouTube. And so we're going to dive into that. And really what I want to see is, where do we find C-level potential or executive potential? A lot of the people that are listening and watching here are thinking, I want to either grow my team or I'm on a team and I want to grow into another role. But before we dive into how they do that, tell us a little bit about you and why you're a great person to talk about this topic.
Well, about me, my background started in marketing many years ago, and I worked for two Fortune 500 companies. One of them was a very flat organization, and so from my early 20s, I was working alongside C-level executives. So my entire career from that point, with that starting point, has really been working in or at the executive level. And that was very formative to me as a marketer and particularly a brand strategist. I was able to see in these huge organizations, first at Fleetwood, then at Starbucks, but how leaders, when they understood some of the fundamental principles of communication, and I'll even say personal branding, when they really put intention behind how they were showing up for people, how they were impacting people, and what they were communicating to people, not just through words, but also through actions, consistency, style, presence. Those leaders were able to create results that were more powerful and more sustainable than leaders who didn't care so much about that and didn't put effort there. And so as a business person, I got very interested in personal development, leadership development, and really understanding how people respond to people, which was great because I'd had a huge body of work and a ton of success on, getting large groups of people to fall in love with brands and products and services. And so I kind of married this passion that I had with this expertise that I had, and launched Accelerate. And so we've been doing this work for 20 years this year. So it's a big year for us. Pretty excited about that. And what we do is we work with senior leaders, usually C-level leaders and their teams, and we are working at all times to help them be their best self, be their best person, be their best leader, and with a focus on, are they developing the results they need to be successful in their current job? Are they getting ready for their next opportunity? So it's results, it's readiness, and with all the companies that we're working on, it's about retention. We are actively working to keep the talent that is within the companies that we're working with happy and engaged right where they're at. And so that's what we work on: results, readiness, and retention. And to me, that's a win-win, right? It's a win for today for the company and the individual, and it's a win for tomorrow for the company and the individual. So I'm pretty passionate about the work, and I just love what we do.
I love that. Results, readiness, and retention. To that retention piece, let's come back to that in just a moment here.
Yeah.
So you've been in the field, then you've coached, and then you've been doing this for a long point of time and with these different clients. So if you're listening here and you're thinking, I want to go down this path of becoming a C-level executive, or I want to become a whatever director, senior manager, et cetera, Or if you're listening and you're thinking, gosh, we have a retention issue, or we need to make sure that the great resignation does not deplete our workforce, I think you're going to get some great nuggets here today. First of all, let's start with this. What issues do employers have with promoting internal talent? Very easy right now to just say, let me just go somewhere else, get a recruiter, and bring in someone external. So what issues are the employers having when promoting internally?
Sure. There's a number of them, and they kind of run the gamut from too little promotion to too much promotion. So on the too little side, which happens a lot, what can happen is that employers, hiring managers, and organizations, first and foremost, they haven't thought about it far enough in advance. So they may acknowledge they've got great talent in certain levels of their organization, but that person they don't deem ready today for the role that they have to fill today. So I think a lot of times folks are looking at like, ooh, what hole do I need to plug? What gap do I need to fill? Oh, there's this opportunity that just came up. I need to, I need people for it. And we've got great people, but they're not ready for this one. And so the problem there is, one, they may be wrong about readiness. Two, they shouldn't wait. So organizations need to have not just leadership development curriculum, professional development opportunities. They really need to use their succession planning tools like the 9 Grid or the 9 Box and map out careers for people so that they are ready when those jobs come up, because it's very painful for a talented person who's working really hard and loves their company, loves their organization, but to then not be considered or to be passed over for a juicy opportunity that causes attrition. That right there
huge.
causes attrition.
When you're saying that, I'm thinking about this one client I had a chance to work with, and she's already at the top level. The CEO position became available. She's preeminently qualified, and they passed her up.
Yep.
So what did she do? She switched and became CEO.
Well, got another CEO job somewhere else.
Right. And so they're losing out on two different things. And why do you think it is? Why do you think it is that we sometimes would rather risk an external hire than an internal promotion?
I ask people that all the time. I think that when you look at the grass is always greener. It really comes down to psychologically, we want something and we're not sure, or we're pretty sure we don't have it exactly right here. So we want to look outside, and when we see a resume and we meet a person that we connect with, we think, ooh, that is going to solve all of our problems. And unfortunately, that's not the case. In fact, there's lots of statistics that prove that an internal promotion has a higher degree of success, especially in senior level roles, than an external hire. And that has a lot to do with, one, we're our best in the interview process. And so whatever you hire, it's not that good. It's not as good as it was on paper. And then they have to learn the culture. And so their ramp is often much longer. And so in that process, in that ramp process, there's so much opportunity for failure and to realize, ooh, I made that hire too quickly. Oh, and by the way, the person that should have got that job left. So now there's this gaping hole. And so there all kinds of things happen when talent is overlooked for an external hire. And there's a number of situations. In fact, in my role, working with senior leaders, I'm often trying to, if they start to go in that direction, I'm really having them strategize about, is that the right thing to do? Is this the right time? And is there anyone that can be elevated in a time frame that would make an internal promotion a better strategic choice? So all of that kind of goes under one reason that companies really struggle with internal promotees is not planning in advance. Another problem, and I'm seeing this a lot, is when we've hired someone maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago into a role and they've done that role really well, then we have another opportunity come up. we don't pull up their resume. We don't look at what we're not using that might be in their toolkit. So a lot of times, one of the things that can happen, they bring someone in from the outside, and someone talented in the organization looks at their resume and says, why did I get passed over? I actually have already done that job 5 years ago. But we forget. And because they might not be doing that today, the organization forgets that or just doesn't know that they have that capacity and that capability. And this again points to why career pathing for specific individuals and revisiting those career paths routinely, at least once a year, is essential to make sure that we know who we have. We know all the jewels that is already, in our team, so that we can elevate them in advance, and that we're not overlooking what they have to offer, because that they almost always have more to offer. And so the third thing, and then I'll wrap this question up for you, but the third thing on the side of why we don't promote is we don't want to take the risk. We don't want to upset the apple cart. We don't want to, if we promote one person, then we're going to have this, everyone else at their level is going to want a promotion. And so a lot of times there's an emotional avoidance that happens when we ought to promote from within, but we know that there's implications and we just don't want to deal with them. And so organizations have to be more strategic. And again, it really does go back to the whole planning thing. If they're more planful about how they're going to elevate people, then that risk, that's not really a risk, because everyone else has got a plan too. Right. So those are some reasons why companies hesitate to hire from within and go external. On the other side.
So on that right there, because so on that right there, it almost makes it feel like you got more, like you should just promote from within, but you can be too far this side too. So when should you be looking outside? And really, even someone listening here going, well, I want to be promoted. How do I pitch myself? And so you're making some good points. Like if you're sitting here listening, you're driving your car or you're doing whatever you're doing, and you think, I want to be internally promoted. Okay, so bring out your resume, pull up your past experience, apply for that job like your brand new, get noticed, all those kind of things. Now I got the ambient noise here.
So I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk about a tool for conversation to tee up that discussion. So a person who might be listening that wants to be considered, that wants to be looked at, that wants a career path, that they could bring to their manager and start a dialogue that is balanced and healthy, because it can be a tricky place to tell your organization, hey, I am really, I want to be assertive about my career. And then people are like, ooh, do we have a retention issue? And that's not the case. Yeah. So we've created some tools for that.
That would be good. Yeah. Talk to us about that too, but also talk to us about the other side of that same thing. That'd be great.
So the other side, the bookend is, I have also seen, with devastating consequences, people in organizations who are over promoted or incorrectly promoted. So it happens because it happens because there are people in organizations who have a lot of potential. They might be young, they might be early in their careers, but they're pacing intellectually, from a social capital perspective. They're pacing well beyond their peers, and so they stand out. And we call them high potentials. And the high potentials, the really truly talented high potentials, they often run the risk of being over promoted. And over promoted, I look at over promotion is when people are being moved through roles more quickly than they can absorb the activity within a role and make an impact. And I'm going to give a generic time frame, although people will debate me on this, and that's fine because it's not a perfect science. But if someone is moving from role A to role B, or a tremendous increase in responsibility, even if it's not a role change, in less than 18 months to 2 years, they run the risk of being over promoted. Now, what I've seen with the talent issues that we've had in the last probably 7 years And the youth.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you say that one more time? Because I think that's just absolutely fascinating for everybody listening. What's the stats there on over promoted? What's that number again?
18 months to 2 years.
Okay.
Which that's a painful thing for some of our younger people to hear, because they want to move much faster. An anecdote, I was teaching a workshop for a client the other day, and they're having this problem where people are pushing on, hey, I've been here 6 months, where's my promotion? And it's not even healthy for them to be promoted within 6 months. So I brought these numbers up to them. I shared some statistics, and we had a discussion around it. And they, they're early 30 somethings in already big roles, director level and above. And they're saying, well, I feel like I'm not moving fast enough if like 8 months goes by and I'm not in a new role. And the world moves fast. We need more than 8 months to really ground in the responsibilities, especially if they require complicated execution, if they require strategic thinking and planning, if they require people management. And at the higher levels that folks are talking about, those jobs require all three. So 18 months to 2 years is a really good baseline. Up to 5 years.
That's so fascinating. Pause. I'm thinking about so many of my clients right now who are in the startup world. And so they're coming in fresh out of, I meet with some amazing 23, 24, 25-year-olds, just absolutely amazing, like you do. And they're just so extremely talented. And they're coming in fresh out of graduating from their undergrad or maybe with their MBA, and they're coming in to a director level position at a startup. But then at some point in time, they're kind of crossing over to an Amazon type world, and they're trying to get that similar position, and it's just not going to happen.
Right. And even if they do, so what I see with the problem of over promotion is that, so one, over promotion, most people will stress out, but they'll maybe figure it out. What I see with the highest and the more aggressive high potentials is that they might get 2 or 3 promotions in a year, another 6 months, and then a job comes up, and this person's been so trustworthy, so I'm going to give them a hybrid job. I'm going to mash these two together because they can handle it. And the fallout from that is devastating, because what's happened is you've put way too much job pressure on an individual who's way too underexperienced. So even if they're talented for it, even if it's going to be in their wheelhouse one day, the amount of experience that they lack, it becomes transparent. And so the rest of the organization starts to see them stumble and fail. And the minute that happens, the whole imposter syndrome comes in, and it doesn't matter whether you're male or female, it takes over. And it starts to erode confidence. Eroded confidence leads to poor decision making, leads to drifting projects. And all of a sudden, this real high potential who's got amazing trajectory becomes a kind of a basket case and starts to underperform. And then the organization looks at them negatively, and then they're put out to pasture, or they leave. And I've seen much more devastating things happen. So over promotion is something to avoid, and the organization can avoid it by having good standards and being open to multiple people weighing in on whether someone is mature enough and experienced enough for a role. And then the individual has responsibility here too, to kind of restrain themselves, kind of pull back the harness and know, and this is something I would tell my younger self if I could. Everything it's coming. It's all coming. It's all there for you. It's all there. It is coming. Pace yourself. Enjoy the process, because if you enjoy today, you will set yourself up to enjoy tomorrow, and not be early 40s, mid 40s, and stressed out.
Oh, this is so good. Kimberly, you got my mind thinking a couple different tracks here. And in a moment, I want to take us back down to this executive idea right here. But I think, one, you're taking me back to my younger self as well. At 26, I got promoted to executive director role And I thought, I got to take it, got to pressure. I couldn't say no.
Couldn't say no.
But now if I could go back, I would have probably kept along the lines of travel and experience and learn and more education, all those different things that I could have done without all of that stress.
Yeah.
And then by the time I was mid 30s, I had actually peaked quite high.
Yeah.
And then I decided to make a career change because it was like, I'm here at 35 years old.
I'm at the top.
What do I do now?
Right.
And really that led into a whole series of transitions to the point where I restarted a whole career. So it's very interesting for me to hear what you're talking about. And for people who are listening, they can either go, yeah, I've been there, Kimberly. I've been there, Mike. I got it. Or they're going, no, I'm not quite sure. So maybe if you're listening and you're going, okay, I'm not quite sure if I believe in over promotion. I'm a 33-year-old and I'm kicking butts and I'm leaving people behind and I'm just doing amazing things. Just go back to, are you experiencing imposter syndrome? How would you classify your maturity? Can you get some external feedback from executive coach, kind of some of the things that Kimberly and I do? And can you get, is there something else you should do? Because you do got a long career path ahead. My dad's 73, it's still working.
Absolutely. And I want to add something to your list.
Yeah.
There is a personal litmus test, whether you're ready to not be, to take the next step without feeling over promoted. Yeah. And that is, have you mastered your current role and are you executing it at ease?
Oh, have you mastered your current role and are you executing it at ease? 25-year-old Mike says, no, he was not.
Yeah. No. And so not that there's no stressful days, you're not going to be like, oh yeah, everything's roses. We know if we're operating at ease, it's with confidence. It's with we can manage our schedule. We've got great self-regulation. We're not bumping into other people with personality issues and style issues. We're at ease. Yeah. We're at ease in this role. If you're at ease in your role, you go on to the next one.
Yeah. And if you've mastered it. So one of the things that's interesting is because I was in kind of an associate role before becoming the director, there were some things that I hadn't finished, I hadn't mastered, I hadn't done to the fullness. And so later on, I wanted to go back and do those, kind of chasing back.
Yeah.
And sometimes we flip-flop because we move before we actually finish something.
It is true. And that's one of the things that I look for is, have you gone through the full cycle of what this job is? Yeah. Because, if we think about it, there's a rhythm to everything. If you're in a job where you're, doing planning and then you've got to execute and then you've got to, implement and, have you gone through the whole cycle of your role yet? Have you gone through it twice? Right? Because that first time's clunky and the second time, hey, and I think that's why I personally look for 18 months to 2 years at the minimum, because then we know we've gone through the cycle of the role at least 1.5 to 2 times. Anything shy of that, it's a risk for the organization and it's a risk for the individual. I have had to help people out of really, just unfortunate situations and health impacting situations that are a result of over promotion. And what you said, and I know I felt it too as a younger person, it is trusting that an opportunity that is there, it's like a bird in the hand or 2 in the bush. My mom used to love that saying. We are so inclined to take the bird in the hand, not knowing that if we just wait and we master this and we enjoy it, then there is 2 in the bush for us.
Yeah.
Because it's the pause that becomes a springboard.
Yeah. So my first book is on speaking without fear. And so a lot of people who end up having imposter syndrome, which I do talk about elsewhere, end up coming to me because they have imposter syndrome, which is part of the reason why they speak with fear. And that over promotion is a huge reason why people have that imposter syndrome, which is very commonly diagnosed. And most people probably listening to this have heard about it. And I've taught about it on previous podcasts as well. Very fascinating. Now let's dive into more of that executive aspect. So we're talking now about people who they have mastered. They
Yes.
have done this.
Yep.
They've excelled. How would you define the executive presence that we want that person to have?
I love that question. So executive presence comes from within first and foremost, and it's confidence. So there's many elements to executive presence, and people have a hard time saying exactly what it is,
Yeah.
but it is the je ne sais quoi. It's the it factor that people lean in, people are magnetized to you because what radiates is positive energy, not necessarily happy energy, positive energy, authority, confidence, and competence. And there's a lot of things we can do on a tactical side to make sure that we're doing everything we can physically to exude executive presence. However, we can't hold that frame long if it's not truly within us to be confident. And that's where the imposter syndrome, really creates a veneer of executive presence for some people, and that's only for the people who are hardwired to naturally show up poised, which is maybe 20% of the population. The other 80%, they really are going to rely on that inner confidence to show up in a way that magnetizes other people to them.
Yeah, it's that interesting. I like that the it factor, the je ne sais quoi, the magnetism. I always thought about that people with charisma, which is not, in my opinion, is not the same as executive presence.
Right, I agree. I agree.
That a
Yeah.
charisma is you want that person to like you. Like I actually went to a coffee one time with a person who had been a leader at something else, and I actually knew his track record
Okay.
and did not respect him as a leader. But funny thing is, I was in my young 30s and I was doing quite well, and I sat down with him and I felt myself wanting him to like me. And he was always described as a charismatic personality. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly it.
Mm-hmm.
There's something in him that I want to impress him. I want him to like me. And I'm a pretty self-confident person. So it's interesting for me to notice that. But executive presence, it's almost where you don't care if people like you or not.
Mm-hmm.
You are going to be you, and you're going to be you well, confidently, humble, and you're going to, okay, so we can unpack that a little bit. What do you think goes into building, like, so someone's a great young leader, they're listening to this, or someone's in HR and they want to develop this. So what goes into developing someone with executive presence?
So are you talking about how do we help people become, have the skills of executive presence or exude more?
Yeah.
Okay. So one thing would be body disposition. One of the visible elements of executive presence is how you hold yourself. Do you have good posture? Do you hold your head up? And, are you walking with a certain cadence? Are you moving? Do you speak? Do you gesture? So the first thing that anybody can work on, and this is the fake it while you make it, but is your body disposition. It's really understanding the body dispositions of stability and resolution and openness, and how they change the environment that you're in, how they get people to, if you're really aware of your body disposition and have some intention around that, you can change what's happening in a room. So one of the first things about presence is kind of like literally your bearing. It's your bearing. And today, it was funny, I was just with my niece the other day, and I probably, mortified her because her posture was not what it should be and could be. She's a beautiful girl and she's young, but to kids today, and I've got 3, and they're all looking at their, they're looking at their things. And I thought, oh, she's tall to begin with. And really, I was like, oh, let's work on that posture. That it will transform how you're showing up for others. So work on your posture, Understand that you have control over your body dispositions. And this is something that I do a lot of work with people to help them elevate and feel more confident about how they're showing up in any situation, whether they're sitting at a table, standing, walking, networking, doesn't matter. But start with posture and then breathing. Breathing is another piece of executive presence, because you were saying it before. Executive presence, there's a control. People with executive presence, they might be joyful, they might be really animated, but they're in control, and that comes from breathing. The other thing that breathing and good posture do is they enhance your voice command. So these are all technical elements of executive presence that people can master while they're working on confidence. And I personally think true confidence, comes from knowing what you're talented to do and how those talents combine to make you unique and valuable. So when we're in an organization, we might be hired for a job, and it might be really clear to us how we add value, but sometimes it's not clear. And so really taking the time to figure out, what is my value? I spend some time in some of the work that I do helping people understand the economic value that they provide to their organization. And that is really confidence building. Because if you know, like, hey, without me, these millions of dollars don't really trickle in. And I'm not talking just salespeople, because that's they have the easy ones, right? They're the salespeople, they're the rainmakers. But I'm talking about people who are in operations, who design systems and implement and execute at a high level, and they may save the organization. They may also bring in revenue through their, service recovery. Marketers, there's a lot of intangibles there sometimes. So it's really understanding, what are you talented to do? How are you using those talents, and how can you use them more often? And then what value does that bring to the organization? And when people know that, they shine a bit brighter.
That's fantastic. I love that you started out with something that that I've discovered when I've been working with different executive clients. You meet with them and probably had the same situation that you've had, where you think you're going to talk about some of the theory and some of the practices, and then pretty soon you're standing with someone and saying, stand up, do this differently. And all of a sudden you're in a whole different role than what you thought.
Yeah.
But there's so much science. And I thought Amy Cuddy does a great job of that in her video on TED, one of the top 10 ones watched. I'll often refer people, just go watch that, and then we can work on it together with Kimberly and figure this out. Let's wrap up with this idea. This has been fascinating. I know we could go so many different directions here.
For sure.
And let's talk a little bit about how leadership has evolved, because I think that's an important thing to realize, especially for people to realize they're in this intergenerational workforce.
Yeah.
And leadership has been seen differently in different stages over the last 20, 30, 40 years. So if you're working with someone older like my dad, and you're younger, you're going to see it differently, but vice versa, he's going to see it differently. So let's go there. But then also, let's talk about what are some of the most important executive leadership areas to address.
Okay.
So let's help people understand leadership, and then help us understand what executive leadership areas people can address, whether they're HR, people development, or they're the employee.
Sure. So the first one was about how leadership's changed and evolved.
Right.
Okay. So one of the things that I think, there are trends, and they're going to be familiar to you and also to the listeners, but I'll share them briefly anyway. And one is that leadership, you go back to the 90s, the 80s, it was very top down, and it didn't matter whether it was a male or a female leading. It was, here's, the organization sets the tone and everyone follows, and, we're good soldiers. And I think in those, if you thought about it, there's a fewer chiefs and a lot more Indians, right? And things kind of had a cadence, a hierarchy that was more clear and formal. And that has definitely changed today. I think that now it's the top down, bottom up, sideways in. I think that organizations and leaders have more burden to meet the needs of all stakeholders in many dimensions. And so leadership is way more complex today. I think then too, if you look at the expansion of women's roles in higher level leadership, you see less of the top down, more of the community building, not necessarily consensus building, but inclusive leadership. I think is one of the impacts that I think that females have had in the workplace over time. And I don't think it's exclusive to females. I think it's one of those things that probably more women just organically work that way. And then that's become something that is very important in leadership today. I also think, and we talked on this a little bit with the executive presence, and you brought it up. I think likability is way more important today than it was 25 years ago.
Very interesting. Yeah.
The amount of social capital you can build is not only going to get you farther in your career, it's going to enable you to get your work done today.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure you're coaching a lot of folks that don't prioritize that, and therefore they're missing out. And so I think those are just some of the ways. I mean, there's many, but I think those are some of the big ways that leadership has changed over the last, decade or two.
I want to throw in something too, because of the visibility of our leadership. Before, you would be 40 years ago, you're only visible if you're in a small town leader. When I was a kid, we went to a church that was a huge church in a town of 2,000. It was a church of 1,500. Now, of course, it had a lot of people coming from the area. So that guy was visible because he's living in a small little town in the 80s. But most people were not. And if he was in a big city, no one would know who he is. Yeah. Yeah. And no one has social media, and he didn't have a podcast. He didn't have other things. But now, it doesn't matter who you are, you're way more visible to everybody.
Yeah, I want to build on that. I should have led with that, because I think that's one of the biggest changes, especially in higher level leadership today.
Yeah,
is the pressure not to misstep.
Oof.
Is extraordinary.
It keeps people from leadership.
It actually has. I had a client not too long ago say, I don't know if I want the CEO role, because I don't know if I want to live under that big of a microscope. And they were being self-aware in that conversation, because they have a certain lovely, fun irreverence about them. But today, you really, if you take on the big mantle at a C-level role, at a president or a CEO role, you could come under some scrutiny that 5 years ago you didn't, 10 years ago you sure didn't. But today, and the dimensions of sensitivity in an organization and in the world are so much more elevated today. So people have to be very careful and well-spoken, and not speak off the cuff as much as they used to, because social media and just the immediate availability and the lack of opportunity to recover before it is front page news.
For pros and cons, right? There's pros and cons of
right. Pros and cons. Yeah. I mean, there's some positive implications of that, but for leaders, good people say stupid things sometimes, and sometimes they can be unrecoverable.
Yeah, it's true. Or you can give a slap. We'll move right on past that. That's right. So what are some executive leadership areas to address? So you're HR watching this leadership development, you're thinking, okay, what are some things I need to be watching? Or you're someone who wants to be in growing levels of leadership. You're ready, you've mastered, you've done it, you have the maturity, you know that you're going to be visible, and you're okay with that. So what are these areas that we need to address?
So there's a couple of things that when we look at the gap between, let's say, someone who is in a senior role, senior director, vice president, that level, and wanting to get to the next level, there's almost an invisible gap. It's almost like the safari. You're driving by the safari and you're like, oh, that tiger is really close. They're not. It's an illusion, but there's this big chasm that tiger is not going to cross. And so you know what I'm talking about there. Is
Yep, yep,
that
yep, yep.
okay?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
that is a good metaphor for what it's like to go from a senior leader into an executive level role. It looks close. You think you're right there, but there's really a chasm and you don't know it's there. And I think that
Yeah.
that happens with a lot of first time C-level leaders. So the
Mm,
things that we are always looking at for C-level leaders are strategic leadership. A
mm.
lot of people get to that level with
Yeah,
amazing results, but they haven't actually mastered strategy. They might be able to do a strategic operating plan because they're taking information and they're creating the best plan they can, and then they're able to execute it. But they're
yeah,
not necessarily able to think 3 and 4 years out or 10 years out. And when you take on that C-level mantle, you've got to be able to do that. Or let's say you're not designed to do that, and that's not of interest to you. You have to know what it is, what it looks like, and know how to equip yourself to deliver strategically, to deliver strategy. So that's something that is often in that chasm. People get there and they've been brilliant at what they have done and how they've gotten there. It's the what got you here won't get you there.
Mhm.
And then they falter and they fail. And people say, like, what is that person thinking? Like,
Right.
that's not smart. Strategy. Self leadership is a second area. And this is a combination of emotional intelligence, self regulation, and habit building. And it covers a number of things. But the reason it becomes vital in the executive levels is because you've got no one watching you. You might have a CEO as a boss, but that person ought to be not having to watch you in your self regulation. So self leadership becomes very important. And we spend a fair amount of time helping people set up systems so that they don't burn out
Yeah.
and so that they are able to protect their public brand, their leadership brand, which is the other area that people think, oh, I've got it mastered. People love me. People love working with me.
Hmm.
Great. But when you get to the level where now you're, like we were talking about, a public facing person at the C level, it doesn't even have to be CEO. Do you know how to talk to an analyst? Do you know how to show up for a media event? Do you know how to be, pulled impromptu out of your seat at an event to introduce your company, even though you're
Hmm.
not the sales or marketing person, but you're the C-level highest ranking person in the room? Do you know how to step into the public limelight and do yourself and your company justice? And most people don't, not unless they've been in a role that already trained them for that, which that's a small percentage of the roles. So those are just 3 of 5 areas where we're really wanting people to understand that
Yeah.
there's that gap between the car that they're driving today and the lion over there.
That's fantastic. Kimberly, where can people find out more about you, what you have? Because I'm sure even as they're listening to that part right there, they're going, okay, tell me more. So where can people find you? Where can people get access to more of this?
Sure. Sure. The easiest place to find us is going to be our website, and that is the letter I, Accelerate, EXCELERATE.com. And if you Google Accelerate or Google my name, Kimberly Gerber, that's going to pop up. And there's a lot of good things like free resources. I mentioned, and I don't want to disappoint the audience, the Career Snapshot
Yeah.
is a tool that we offer folks. They can sign up, get into our free resources, and download that tool. There's some instructions on there. It's a great tool for being candid with yourself about where you are, where you want to go, what skills you have mastered, which ones you need to master, and the most important part, what are the behaviors and habits that are making you successful and limiting you today, and how do you change them? And that's a great tool to fill it out, bring it to your supervisor, your manager, and have an open discussion about how to get from where you are today to where you want to be with the right skill set.
That's fantastic. And we'll put all those links inside the show notes on the podcast and also on the YouTube, so people can check it out and find it quickly. But I'm glad you mentioned it as well. But you don't have to stop your car and pull over real quick if you're driving. You just get it later on. Just look at your Apple show notes or whatever platform you listen to. But Kimberly, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being on the show today.
Oh, it was my pleasure, Mike. This is a lot of fun. I love these topics.
Thank you. And so much to all of our audience as well. Really appreciate you for taking time to listen to this conversation, for you to learn some different areas. And please take a moment to like, subscribe, share, maybe pass this on to somebody that you know is on that kind of trajectory of realizing their potential. And until next time, this has been Masters of Employee Development with Mike Acker and Kimberly Gerber. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Advance with Mike Acker, a podcast designed to provide an edge for leaders through improving practical leadership skills and increasing confidence in speaking. Mike is a best-selling author and business owner who has helped many leaders increase their skills and their confidence, propelling them to new heights in their personal and professional endeavors. Join an incredible group of professionals taking the steps to become better leaders at connect.stepstoadvance.com. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.